Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Compound modal distances or compound modal scale degrees, alternative names for distances over an octave. Get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin', and we have to have Microsoft Excel for that. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just build the part of the worksheet that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook though, 4 tabs down below. Fretboard example practice blank. The fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard, we will refer to the example tab having the answer key. The practice tab having pre-formatted cells. So you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting, but if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we'll be working in the blank tab where we built this from scratch from a blank worksheet, and we'll be continuing to build in essence in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing both our Excel skills and music skills at the same time. Let's go on over to the fretboard tab. Remembering what we're doing, we're trying to look at distances, intervals, but using a more logical structure so that it doesn't mess us up by pulling us out of the optimal way to view the fretboard, which is by a map of the territory like the globe, having 7 continent destination locations, in our case 5 non-destination locations that are like the oceans that we go through to get to the destination locations. Our head is kind of like in space over the top of the guitar, this being the low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. From that vantage, we note that the world is spinning, rotating around. We give it 12 degrees of rotation, naming those degrees by the notes. In this case, we're looking at the C, 7 notes related to the C scaled or degree that we'll be looking at. Note that we could shift the whole thing up to C sharp, to D, the whole thing. All the continents would move relative around in a circle, so that therefore, once we know what perspective we're looking from, we no longer name the notes on the fretboard by note, but rather by absolute position, by the continents, by the Nashville number system, which is basically the mode, the modal points. That's what we want to be looking at. Now, the problem is scale degree terminology forces us to change the name of the modal point and make it a different scale degree. We want to try not to do that, but it's hard because that's in the scale naming convention and that's in the standard chord naming convention. How could we get around that? You could use a naming convention that's normal, which means you don't rename the node you're on, you measure the distance from it. So this would be 2 nodes forward from the Mixolydian node, 2 nodal half steps, in other words. So we've talked about this before, but now we want to think about, well, what if I'm going up more than an octave distance to get up here? Then there's a couple different ways we can do it because we're measuring this distance from here to here 2 different ways, whether we are using scale degrees or modal half-step distances, modal distance. Because we're measuring by the full distance in notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, scale degrees implying that if I say it's a major third, then it implies that it's a 4-note distance away. And we're also measuring by either scale degree or modal half step. Modal half step would be 2 modal half steps up. Scale degree would be the third if I make that the 1. So that means that if I go above more than an octave of distance, then I could keep on counting up or think about it as a clock face going around in a circle. So I would recommend the easiest way to think about it is to say the distance, the full distance, going an octave up, but keeping the second term, which is either scale degrees or modal distance, within the 1 octave range, as though you're going around a clock. But we could do it the other way, which means we're going to have both of those numbers increasing as we go. I'll show you what I mean. If we go to the example tab, remember that this is the fret 5 of the fretboard, where I mapped out just basically a map for our continents and the oceans. If I put that into a circle, it looks like this. if we start, for example, on this number 5, let's say this time, we're starting on Antarctica this time. If I count forward to like this number 7, it's going to be 1, 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree, because it would be 1, 2, 3 scale degrees up. If I count the oceans as well, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 up. That would be equivalent to the notes. Now I could go backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modal half steps negative modal half steps, or I can make a scale degree going backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 6th scale degree. But we don't usually use scale degrees going backwards. We'll talk more about that later. So we're really concerned with going forwards at this point in time. And then what if I go all the way around the circle and still land on the 7? Like I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So my options are to either call this a 9th modal half step, which would be like the 10th scale degree, or to keep it within the same octave and say, well, that's kind of like the same as going 1, 2 modal half steps up, which would be like the 3rd scale degree. Now, I think you can get the best of both worlds by naming it the total distance, which is including the oceans, 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be a 4-note up, 2nd modal half step, or 3rd scale degree. And then if I go all the way around, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, right? I think I counted that right. So you can give the distance 16 note away, but still call it a 1, 2 modal half step up. And that gives you the full distance term, and it gives you kind of the flavor that's still within the same octave. So those are kind of your options. If I go on over to the blank tab, we looked at in prior presentations the notes in our musical alphabet. We chose 7 of them. This is in the key of C, but all other keys would have the same relative measurement positions. We then listed out starting at 0, counting up the octaves in 1 octave going clockwise, which gives us 12 different distances if I start at 0. We named them, noting that naming convention adds a degree of confusion because it compares everything to the measurements of the major scale. Now that's not optimal because we don't have to do that. We already know our terms for measurement. What are our terms? They're half steps, or they're going to be modal half steps. So to use major and minor is kind of weird. What you would expect to do is say, what node are we measuring from, and how many half steps away is it from that node, or how many modal half steps is it away from that node? That would be, you would think, the better way to do it. So that's what we're suggesting or doing over here from a modal perspective. So I would try to add this into your normal conventional naming system, not replacing the scale degrees because I don't think they're going away, right? But at least add this to the convention and say, well, look, if I measured it just normal-wise by distance and by modal half steps from the node that I'm on, this is what it would be. So that's going to be our idea. If we then continue to go forward, then we saw before that I could use both of these terms. Like I could say that this, for example, is a 16-note away major third, meaning it's a major third is usually 4 notes away plus an octave, or 12 notes, gives me 16 notes away, a major third. That's easier for me to know because it tells me the total distance and it gives me the flavor of a major third. But a textbook will usually drop the 16 and just call it a major 10, which means you have to figure out the distance by saying, well, a major 10 minus 7, if there were scale degrees, 7 scale degrees would be a third. And if it's a major third, that would normally be 4 notes away. And therefore, it must be like an octave higher than that because it's a 10 here. So it's going to be 10 plus 4, which is a 16 note away distance. Okay, similarly, we had over here, if we think about it from our terminology, and I said, okay, this is our distance is up top. If I measure it from the Ionian node, I can say this one is an IP, or Ionian to Phrygian modal range. And then it's an I3 if I look at a Nashville number system modal range, which I would like to call with our two distance terms a 4-note away, I from the Ionian node, and then second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree, so, right? And then if I continue counting up this way, then what I normally would call that is a 17 note away. Well, this would be a 16 note away right here, 16 note away, I second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. So similarly, instead of having this 2 continue going upwards, I think it's easiest to keep the 2 as though you're going around a clock face distance, the shortest distance within 1 octave, and then say the 16, which will give you the total distance, allowing you to see the distinction between this I2 and this I2. This is a 4-note away Ionian second modal half step. This is a 16-note away Ionian second modal half step. Still has the flavor of a second modal half step. But this is a little bit longer to say than if I was to just name it by modal half steps. So I could eliminate the 16 and just count the modal half steps, and that might be easier to say, and it's a little bit more mathematically consistent. So let's just see what that alternative would look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a column between the V and the W. I'm going to select here, right-click, and insert. And I'm going to call this then an alt octave. So I'm only going to apply this down here to the octaves first going up, and then in a future presentation we'll look at the same idea going in the negative direction. So here are our normal distances going from the Ionian node that are within the first octave. So we have a 0-note away Ionian 0 modal half step away. We've got a 1-note away Ionian 0.5 modal half step. It lands us in the ocean. In other words, we have a 2-note away Ionian first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree. A 3-note away Ionian 1.5 modal half step, and we have a 4-note away Ionian second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. A 5-note away Ionian third modal half step, which would be the fourth scale degree. A 6-note away Ionian 3.5 modal half step, which would be a 4.5 scale degree, right? A 7-note away Ionian fourth modal half step, which would be the fifth scale degree, and so on and so forth. We get up to the 11-note away Ionian sixth modal half step, which would be the seventh scale degree, and that's when it repeats because we're looking at steps instead of scale degrees. So that means when I go around to a 12-note away, an octave up now, it would be a 12-note away I7 instead of a 12-note away I8. Why? Because if I was on this I and I count from the I, not including the I, it would be a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I include the I as the 1 from a scale degree standpoint, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the scale degree is always off by 1 because we didn't start at 0, and that's what's throwing everything into a tizzy, right? So then this one then, let's skip down to this one, would be a 14-note away I, and then this would be a 14-note away I8. So 14-note away I8. This would be a 16-note away from the I ninth modal half step. Now again, I think this term is a little bit easier to communicate with people with, because if you say something is like the Ionian first modal half step away, and then you can distinguish, then that gives you the flavor. It would be the first modal half step away, which would be the second scale degree, right? That gives you the flavor of it. And then you also have the distance, which is 14, or you could say something like it's the 2-note away plus an octave, plus 12, 2 plus 12, Ionian first modal half step. But you can do this a little bit more easily, similar to over here, where you could just say it's an Ionian 8th modal half step or 9th scale degree. And that way you don't even say the notes away, and people have to say, okay, well, if it was the 8th, then I have to subtract down to get down to the first. So I'd say 8 minus 7 is 1. And that would mean it would be the first would be the distance within 1 octave, right? So that would be a little bit faster to say, and this is more kind of mathematically consistent, because if I look at this, then I can convert each of them back by saying, well, the 8 minus 7 would give me the first modal half step, which would be in the same octave, and the 14 minus 12 would give us the 2 notes away. So this one is consistent because I can convert each of them back to their relative points within an octave by subtracting out the multiples of 12 and the multiples of 7, and we would get back, which is not always, it's a little bit more wonky over here to think of that, about that idea, although still kind of relevant going this way. So that's the alternative naming that we can use. I still think that functionally this would be the best name, but this is kind of more mathematically consistent. All right, let's see if I can do a fancy formula. By the way, I'm rethinking this formula over here. I think there's probably an easier way I can actually have done this without building this other table. I won't redo it because the table kind of works. But if we take a concept that I'm going to use here, you would think I'd be able to do this without that. So let's think about it. So what do I want this to do? Now we're getting into our Excel mind. I want this to be a 12. This is going to be a 12i, and then I want it to be a 12i7. So that means that I want to be able to pull this whole first bit is fine. The 12i is fine, but then I want to tack onto it not the 0. I want to replace the 0 with a 0 plus 7, basically. I'd like to do a little math there and say 0 plus 7. So I could say, okay, could I just pull the 12i bit here? Notice I can't go from the right because there's different characters. Sometimes there's a 0.5, which means there's 3 characters versus 1 character. But I could pull from the left because it always has 3 characters. So I always want the number and then the letter, which is always 3 characters at this point. So I could say, all right, I could get that. That would be a left, pull the left bit of this cell, and then comma, and how many characters do we want? 3. And then boom. So that gives us the I-12. That's cool. But then what I want to do is to take this last number, which is either a 1-digit number or it's a 1, 2, 3-digit number if it's a decimal, and I want to add to it 7. So first I have to figure out how can I get like just that last bit so that I can then add to it to a 7. So let's see how we could do that. That would be okay. Maybe I can do like a right. I'll do it here first. A right align, and then I want to take like this number, and then I want to say I want to take that, and then comma, and I'm going to say len, which is I'm embedding another one of that, and that's going to be the whole thing, all the characters within there. So I want you to take all the characters, but then subtract out some of them. Which ones do I want to subtract out? Minus. I want to find the ones to subtract out. I want you to find, once again, this I. So the I up top, I want you to find that I in there, and then comma within that text. Find the I within that text, and then put the brackets. So it should subtract everything. Oh, hold on a sec. Everything after the I. Let's see if it does that. So there it does it, right? So that gave me a 0.5. Great. So now I just want to take that 0.5 and add to it the 7. So I'm just going to take that whole thing plus 7. And that would give me 8. If I add a decimal, it would be 7.5. Is that right? Yeah. So now I'm going to do this whole thing. That looks good, but I don't want to be pulling from this cell because I'm going to copy it. So I'm going to say I want to be pulling it from instead of 51, let's bring all the 51s down to 50. So I'm going to bring this down to 50, and then bring this down to 50. And then boom. So now it's pulling this and adding one. So now I'm going to take this whole thing and copy it. I'm just going to copy that whole thing. And then, oh, I didn't want to do that. Undo. Take this whole thing and copy it. Control C. And then I'll just paste it on the end here, but I'll put an and. So I want to say and, tying it together to this whole thing. Enter. There we go. So we get a 12 note away I7. All right, let's double click on it. Is there anything I need to make an absolute reference? This I need to, that's in V2. So within V2, I want this, I could make it absolute, that will copy down, but I also want to be able to copy it to the right. So I want to allow it to move to the right, so I don't want to restrict the V. I do want to restrict the 2 by putting a $sign. That's called a mixed reference. And then I think that's good. So let's go enter and see if that copies down okay. So that gives me a 13 away I7.5. I think that's right. So then this is, instead of it being a 14I first, now it's a 14I eighth modal half step, right? Instead of it being a 15 note away I 1.5 modal half step, it's a 15 note away I 8.5 modal half step. Instead of a 16 note away I second modal half step, it's a 16 note away I ninth modal half step, which would be the 10th scale degree. Instead of being a 17 note away Ionian third modal half step or fourth scale degree, it's a 17 note away Ionian 10th modal half step, which would be the 11th scale degree, as we can see over here, right? And then instead of it being an 18 note away I 3.5 modal half step, it's an 18 I 10.5 modal half step. And we don't run into this diminished versus augmented problem because we're not measuring it stupidly the way the normal. A 19 note away I fourth modal half step, which would be a 5th scale degree, could be a 19 note away Ionian 11th modal half step. And again, I can get back to the 4 by saying, 11 minus 7, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? So let's copy this down. And then that goes down. Let's copy this down one more. And then do I have to change this one? This one is a 24 note away I, but I don't want it to be 7 again. This needs to be 7 and then another 7, because now we've gone 2 octaves up. So now this is a 24 note away I 14. So let's make this green. And I think that's it. So now we can copy this down. So now you can thoroughly confuse your friends with this terminology. Let's go ahead and copy that over and see if I can copy that over to the other locations. So I'm going to put another column after the D, right click and insert. Okay, so now what would happen if I copied this alt stuff over here? And so now we're just going to do the same thing, but we're going to measure it from the D. And it pulled this over correctly, so that looks correct. So now the 12 note away Dorian from the Dorian node 0 modal half step is now a 12 note away Dorian 7 modal half steps because it's an octave up, right? So the 13 note away Dorian 0.5, let's do this one. The 14 note away Dorian first modal half step, which would be the 2nd scale degree, is now the 14 note away Dorian 8th modal half step, which would be the 9th scale degree. 15 note away Dorian 2nd modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree, is a 15 note away Dorian 9th modal half step or 10th scale degree, right? So I think it copied over properly. Beautifully done, if I do say so myself, and I didn't need to make this wacky table. And I would think that we could use that concept over here, which maybe we will do once I do the final project. I'm going to try to repeat this entire table, I think, on the final project to have it all on one sheet, which is going to be which this table's a lot larger than I originally anticipated, but we'll clean it up maybe on the final project to get it all fit on one sheet that could be your reference sheet. So that'll be, you look forward to that. Let's insert another one here for the Phrygian, and we'll just copy this down for the Phrygian, and we'll go boom. All right, so now we have if we go down here, the 19 note away Phrygian 4th modal half step, 5th scale degree would now be a 19 note away Phrygian 11 modal half step, which would be the 12th scale degree. Perfecto, just like my friend Mundo would do it. And Mundo's a perfectionist. That's why I invented the term perfecto mundo. No one's ever heard that before, but my perfectionist friend Mundo. Okay, let's copy this over again. Do it for the Lydian. Copy it again. Do it for the Lydian. That's what I'm talking about. So it's a 21 note away Y 5th modal half step 6th scale degree, which would be a 21 note away Lydian 12th modal half step or 13th scale degree. All right, and then let's go to this one after the X. This is going to be popular, I can tell. People are going to be into this, man. This is like... No one can resist a table like this. My marketing strategy is going to pay off on this one. We're going to say, so I think let's just copy it across. There's the Mixolydian after the Aeolian. Right click, insert here, Aeolian, and I'm going to say, then we'll just copy this one, copy that, try to finish this off. I'm getting tired, I'm getting hungry, and then I'm going to try to insert over here to see if it'll pull the formatting. Right click, insert, yeah, it pulls the formatting over, but not perfectly. So let's go ahead and select this whole bit down here, and then format paint it, and I'm just going to hit the right arrow, format paint, bam. All right, then I'm going to copy this down and finish this off for the Locrian. Finish it off crazy like. We're going to get crazy to finish this off because it's the finale. We're going loco on the finale. 31 Locrian 5th modal half step 6th scale degree, which I'm sorry, that's 32 Locrian 5th modal half step 6th scale degree would be the 32 note away Locrian 19th modal half step, which would be the 20th scale degree, and so on and so forth. Locrian ain't so loco. I ain't scared of the crazy Locrian. I've dealt with crazy people before. I live in California. Think little craziness can scare me? You don't know. You don't know the least of it, man. I've seen stuff you wouldn't believe. All right, let's copy and paste this down. Okay. There we go. There we go. I think that's it. So next time we'll copy it up this way, and so this makes more logical sense, where it actually makes sense going in the negative direction, which again the scale degrees under the normal scale degree interval terminology does not. So this could be, again, I think very helpful to kind of sort out in your mind what is actually happening with terminology that's more specific, particularly when you're going in the negative direction.